Good afternoon, everyone that's going to be watching this from everywhere in the world. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Let's Talk. Today, I have a wonderful guest who is a Nigerian born sociologist, who is an American sociologist, actually born and raised in Nigeria. He is Professor Godwin Ohiwerei, who is the chair of sociology at Jersey City University here in the United States. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking because he's the man of the moment and he's one who's contributed a lot to the understanding of sociology and societies here in the United States, and he's attended and presented papers all over the world. So today I'm going to be asking him a lot of questions because he really is an example of the fact that there are so many African-born scholars who are doing wonderful things around the world and still have interest in the continent that we call home. Professor Hiwere, welcome.
Thank you.
So, how are you doing today?
Trying to deal with the weather. You know, it's freezing out there.
Yes, indeed. And I don't know what it's going to be like where you are, but we're expecting another snowstorm.
Exactly. Tomorrow is going to be another rough day.
Right, which makes one remember the Africa that you and I grew up in and the weather. And sometimes I say that if the United States or Europe was blessed enough to have the kind of weather that we have in Africa, this part of the world will do a tremendous lot with that weather.
Or they all maybe as let me just be direct, as lazy as we can be, taking for granted, our blessing of good weather in Africa.
Yeah, which actually just leads me to what I want to discuss with you today, because you used the term lazy. I want to start by talking, for example, about the fact that your father was actually one of the people who one will think of as we talk about Nigeria's founding fathers. I use the words founding fathers now because it was just about 2 weeks ago that one of my guests here used the word founding fathers and said Nigeria did actually have founding fathers and they had a vision for Nigeria. And so I know that your father played an important role in the formation of that country, in establishing the institutions of that country. And I know that one of the things that he did was being tapped by the Nigerian government along with a bunch of other people to actually begin the process of having negotiations, and actually went to England, which was our colonizer, and had conversations with them about how to develop the structure of our institutions. I may be wrong because I really don't have all of the details, perhaps. So perhaps you can just enlighten us what he did.
Let me take it back a little bit in terms of maybe defining this issue of founding fathers. Um, I want to bring it down to the element of grooming these individuals who later became the founding fathers. They didn't just become founding fathers because each one of these individuals, if you go back to understanding their background, social development, you will find out that these were particular characters in their community that the community identified them as critical, in terms of their collective development. In other words, we always say it takes a village. But in this case, is that the village also recognizes those that they feel will take them to whatever goals that they've determined. So, I mean, Africans have always been very, very, very aware and conscious in terms of their social development, communal development. So I'm saying that because for my dad, um, he was identified early as brilliant. And let me just put it that way. Where he's my dad anyway, so I see him as such. But the community recognized him. He went to government college. I mean, he went to the very good schools in Nigeria. And interestingly enough, one of the first few to get into University of Ibadan, the new institution for the country in terms of university, and he was there to do medicine. But he started from University of Ibadan to read medicine, but the community went to his father and told him that they're not interested in having a medical doctor because there were whites around who can always treat them. But these white people or these people cannot save their land. They were very critical in terms of their land, so they wanted a lawyer. And so they begged his father to make his son switch from medicine to law because for the community, they consider law to be much more critical for them. Someone who can defend them, somebody who can be there for them. It played a more significant role for them. Someone who can battle for them. And so, interestingly enough, they did send a delegation to go see him in the university. And I tell you, they pressured him enough to switch from medicine to law. When I was discussing with him, at various points, he said he had no clue what law was. I mean, he did mathematics. I mean, that was a core area for him. He wasn't into the social sciences. He didn't know what. But the community calls, and so he switched to law, and that's how he ended up in England. And then, as a matter of fact, by the time he came back to Nigeria. 3 months after I came back from Nigeria after study, he ran for member of House for the newly created Midwest state, and won. And from that, the national, recognition took place, of which he was one of those that went to Jamaica for the Commonwealth Parliament representing Nigeria with a host of other people, including Shagari and the former president, and a host of people who later, became the core founding fathers, as we call it, in Nigeria. But my point is that in terms of looking at those who became the founding fathers, or what you call that, there were a lot of them not even nationally recognized. But if you go back to 1964, Commonwealth delegates from Africa, you look at Nigeria in particular, you will see a lot of people who we do not see within a kind of national understanding to kind of see their role that they played in that. So it was very critical in terms of the newly created Midwest, and in terms of again the new country. So there were two situations that they were dealing with. One was the Midwest, which became the fourth state, and Nigeria, which was just growing, as a new country. And he came back from England. He said he wanted to serve his country, so he came back from England to with his family to do that.
Right. Thank you very much for that background, which actually got me thinking about one thing. As a sociologist, and of course, I know some of your work, and I know that you are interested in the development, the functioning, and the structure of human society, including the social problems. Here is a background of a Nigerian nation that you have just described. And there is one reason why I consider that generation of your father and my father, and a lot of them that you refer to. There is one reason I refer to them as the greatest generation. And one of them is the fact that at that time, like you just rightfully mentioned, there were a bunch of people who did not get national recognition. And even your father was not looking for that national recognition. So what I would like you to do is to just come in to us as a sociologist. If you will please just describe what happened to get us where we are, and how would you diagnose Nigeria right now? One of the reasons this is a very important question is that in the year 2000, Karl Mayer an American journalist who had lived in Nigeria, went back to visit and wrote the book The House Has Fallen, because it was in the Nigeria that he had expected to see. And just 2.5 years ago, in 2014, 2012, when Nigeria seemed to be doing okay, you came to a conference that I put together as you were the keynote speaker, and you began your keynote speech by declaring Nigeria a failed state, even though it didn't look very much then as a failed state, but now it does in many respects. So I am wondering what you see that the rest of us don't see, and what you saw in 2012 that the rest of us did not see.
Well, sometimes I'm blunt and people don't like that, but, I prefer to say it as I see it, as I study it. And the biggest problem, our main problem, not just in Nigeria, but in Africa, is an understanding of what I would call a collective conscience. Our education is hopeless. The educational system in Africa is hopeless. I mean, hopeless. I'm not even talking in terms of marginal in this case. I'm saying hopeless. What we failed to do was that we failed to develop a curriculum for African students. That transition from the colonial to the post-colonial was not well dealt with. What we did was we inherited the colonial mandate, and the educated elite of that time, trained by their colonial masters, were really a reflection of the colonial masters in dark skin. Nothing really changed. If you go back to our school system, our books came from England. The colonial, institutions, that the infrastructure that was built was what we inherited. We never took the pains to develop ours. And what you see, and still continues, is that our educational system, okay, just look in terms of the brightest students that we have in the system. Any country in Africa, look at the educated, the most educated, the best educated, the one that we consider to be the brilliant students that are supposed to be leaders, they disappear when it comes down to that level of leadership. In other words, when you go back to those who you went to school with, say high school, which is a critical piece in terms of our educational system. Think of all of those individuals that were considered to be the top students. Think of all of those that then we had the grade ones, grade two, grade threes, and all of that. Think of all of those that had the grade ones and that were supposed to be the best students, that were supposed to now go forward and make magic happen. You will hardly find anyone in the any one of them at the top, leadership structure. Who are those who are leading Africa? The ones, if you go back to your secondary school, the ones that a lot of people thought that would never make it are the ones that are leading. And are we supposed to wonder why it is? I'm going back to the educational system again. See, the way we set the system up is that the very top of the crop, to those students who do the best, the curriculum is really external to the African. We are trained we read North America, European history, the chemistry, the physics, the biology, all of those. Yes, when you become the best in those areas, what does it tell you about your village? What does it tell you about your own personal conditions and life? What does it tell you about your environment? Nothing. You are the best chemistry student, you are the best physics student. See, when the community went to my grandfather and said, we wanted not somebody who is a doctor, but we wanted somebody who is a lawyer, somebody who is skilled enough to save our land. Something, come back, get educated, come back and become a very significant part of a community. So my thing is, the curriculum is not developed for us to understand our problems. And I bring that to the point that liberal arts is seriously undermined in Africa. Everybody wants to be a doctor or a lawyer. Who is there to take care of those who suffer from the social ills of the society? How do we map out our future? How do I understand my tradition? What do I know whether or not I'm alienated from my social conditions? How do I understand that I'm not doing well if that is a reflection of my family, my environment, or what? We've not studied ourselves to understand us well enough. And I think the crisis comes from that problem in terms of the curriculum, that the African is alienated from his own social conditions. And how do you start to, and because of this, look at Nigeria, for example, wanted to create a constitution. What did they do? Practically adopted an American mandate. How does that suit Nigerians? I mean, we have not, my point is, we have not really strictly, we do not understand our social conditions, and we are very much alienated. That is what I'm talking about when I talk about the lack of a collective conscience. When you have a collective conscience, we have a common goal, we drive towards that goal because we all agree this is where we want to go. We don't have that.
Wow, this is actually fascinating. And you used the word community many times. I am also really fascinated by the fact that the community went to your grandfather and said this. And your father responded to the community, which was what that generation did. And I know that my father became what he became, not because he chose to become that, as much as the fact that his own father said to him, this is what I want you to become because that will bring respect to our community. And he did that. Now we have people, in Africa who really don't even seem to know the communities that they come from. Therefore, you can go all over Nigeria, for example, and you see people who live in Benin City, which is only a 30-minute drive from a place called from Ora, which is my hometown. It's only about a 30-minute drive or so, a 45-minute drive. And their children are adults, but they've never been there. They've never been to the village because it's called. Right. So I am wondering what impact you think that has had in this concept that you have introduced here of a collective conscience.
Today, we are very, very individualized. Um, Siblings don't even relate much to each other. It's you and your kids. That's it. That support system that we always had is no longer there. And for me, I always tell people the only reason that I'm very conscious of this is because of my sociology. Sociology was a teaching tool for me, not in terms of just being a sociologist, but in terms of my own personal development. I remember my first course in sociology. When I was sitting in class, it was like an epiphany of some sort. I'm sitting in class and I'm doing social stratification. As simple as it was, I did not.
So it seems to me that we are talking about a bunch of things here. One of them is the fact that the generation about which we are talking really cared about everyone, regardless of class. For example, even those people who went on to have successful lives, what we consider now to be successful lives, in public service and in business, and they were part of that formation of Nigeria, still seemed to have great respect for those who became farmers and considered them as brothers and friends because they recognized that without farming, there was no food, there would be no food for everyone to eat. So the question that I have is, where has that recognition gone? Why don't we seem to have that recognition anymore? Because one of the things that guests have been talking about here is the fact that it just seems like in Africa right now, once you're born into a certain social status, it just carries on. And the higher social group goes, the more difficult it becomes for others to bridge the gap.
This is what I'm talking about in terms of a collective conscience. That if we all understand that our social situation is what has created our conditions, and that when we are able to manage that social situation, change the variables that makes that life the way it is, it becomes more competitive, which is best for the society. It's not a question of just having certain people that continue to lead. Right? If just for example, in terms of my dad and his siblings, my dad took care of his siblings, and and one of the things he said was that he prefers to help his brothers than help his brothers' children, because helping his brothers gives the brothers independence to be able to take care of their own family. But he had to make that sacrifice. We used to make the sacrifice, right? Until you started to find out, and if you look at our development post 60s down to the 70s, if you look at our development, then you start to see where the selfishness and this greed started to really take hold. And that greed factor, the you know individualizing ourselves outside of that community, is really the part of that crisis. Now, I want to also digress in terms of post, at the end of the colonial era, Nigerians and Africans were very excited to a certain future, the best they wanted. What happened? Because look at 2015, where are we? What did we do wrong? Where have we gone wrong? Sociologist August Comte talks about societal development, and he talks in terms of three areas in terms of societal development. One is in terms of society starting with a certain tradition, and that tradition is in terms of religion. When the society begins, religion is a very critical part of that society, right? As a matter of fact, religion is a further development from, that basic hunting and gathering society. But when religion, you really see the power of authority. But then society is supposed to develop from that down to the industrial complex, right? Say, for instance, United States. But in between that is where religion meets with that scientific society. And there's a struggle in there until the society develops in itself to become much more scientific. Nigeria's, started with that religious base and had grew. And just when it was ready to go into that scientific level, in terms of scientific mode, a lot started to happen, right? If you look at the late 70s and early 80s, where we really met with serious economic conditions, rather than tackle those problems, what did we do? We got lazy and reverted back to asking God for everything. And the societal development, if you really look at our development, we've not been able to take the challenges that we are supposed to deal with, again, going back to our educational system. See, the fault of our educational system is still very much critical. No matter where you go, no matter what we're talking about, until that curriculum is in place, ready to deal with the social issues as it comes, so that we don't always revert back to God for everything. Anyway, let me.
No, in prepare in while I was preparing for this chat with you, I read a little about your uncle, Mr. Ohiwerei, Felix Ohiwerei, who actually is Nigeria's top CEO. There is no dispute about that. And one of the things that that he mentioned in this interview that I was reading was that, as a matter of fact, he referred to your dad as my dad. He said, "My dad told me never to join a cult," and I
Yeah,
hated that. And but as he read the interview, he clarified that your dad, that my dad, that he was referring to, that is your dad, who he was referring to as my dad, was actually his older brother,
yeah,
and that his biological father, who he went on to describe as a great man, was the one who instilled those values in your dad, who then instilled those values and even more on him.
yeah.
And I want you to, if you don't mind, as a sociologist, just take a look at that. Is one of the problems with Africa the fact that that is missing? Because I recall that when I was growing up, for example, if any of my uncles came home with a brand new car, my father, who was their brother, will call them in and say, "Did you get a promotion at your job?" And if
Hmm.
they said no, he will say, "How did you get the money to buy that car?"
Yeah.
And they would explain it. You know, so now I am, now I think it's everyone will tell you it's something different now. It's a different situation. And I just want to find out from you what is going on or what has happened with that.
What is going on is the fact that we generally do not operate with a common base. I mean, we used to, in terms of what the expectation of a family is. I mean, a family defines itself. So whether you are dealing with your uncle or your father, you're dealing with the same person, because what your father tells you is what your uncle will tell you. So there's nowhere to go. I mean, there is nowhere to go. If you mess up, the same message that your father gave to you, if an uncle or an aunt comes in, is going to give you the same message. So that is what that collective conscience is. In other words, this is where we want to go. Now, there are different tracks to get there. But today, we don't have a common goal. We do not know, we have no direction as to where we're going. We just don't understand where we are supposed to go, because the fundamental basis of education does not give us that. If we did liberal arts seriously as a core part of the curriculum, that's where we define it. That's where we argue them. That's where we fight over it. And then what happens? Like in sociology, we talk about the 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 dialectic, right? What is, what counters it, and the synthesis from it, right? The educational system is supposed to be dealing with these issues. Tell me what Nigerian universities and African universities are doing in terms of social economic development of their countries. They're not doing anything. Look at the elections going on now in Nigeria. How many universities out there have conferences dealing with the issues? So the point is, we don't have a common base of belief system and to operate with. The one thing Africans are doing these days is God. I mean, that's just it. We read the Bible, read the Bible, read the Bible, right? Because that's just the base that they revert to when everything fails. They've not taken the common idea that we need to figure out exactly what we want and where we want to go, and how we bring this into our educational system in terms of development. So, okay, so in terms of talking about my dad and his brothers, your father and his brothers, the family core as a unit, you see a lot of the relationships. Because what you were reading from our uncle in terms of his expectation, understand also something too. If someone is older than you by 1 day, they're senior. 1 day. Not to talk of 2 years. 5 years, it becomes an uncle. You know, what used to happen in the home where Africans used to have 20 children, the father wasn't just there, minding 20 kids. The oldest child has a responsibility. The second one has a responsibility to the younger one. The younger ones understand the dynamics in terms of operation of the family. Father is not home, mother is not home. There's somebody delegated, and we all respect that person who is delegated. Go to Africa today. 20-year-old with money in his pocket is running the family. The man who is 70 years old that is supposed to be the family member, he can't say anything because he's going to beg the 20-year-old for money. So, that base is what I'm saying. That base of understanding that no matter how much money you have was not the defining factor in terms of what our conscience, collective conscience is. That's not how it works. We already have a system in place and we have elders, right? And whatever problems we're experiencing, we know who to go to. There's a go-to person for different problems. We didn't have therapists, right? So there's a go-to person. And we respect the person too, all right? In other words, whatever the verdict, when we go to that person, we are going to respect the verdict, right? And we're going to walk within it. And that individual needs to be very democratic in terms of how they deal with the issues, right? We've lost all of that because we don't study it, we don't preserve it, we don't improve on them. So it's like you wake up every day as an African and try to figure out what to do. So two things you do: put money in your pocket and hold the Bible.
So, Professor Ohiwerei, it is important that you brought up religion and you brought up the politics when you mentioned the upcoming elections in Nigeria. And I'm just wondering if there is a way that you can bring all of that together. What impact has politics had on the values that we're the African values, and what impact has politics had, and what impact has religion had? Because one of the things that we know is that in the era that you and I have been talking about, when things were um, not only decent but respectable, we just had the traditional churches, and things have changed in that regard. And now we have what we have. We have the politics that we have. We have the religious practices that we have. And then we have the values that we have that have changed. And I'm just wondering if there's a way you can bring them all together to say, this kind of relates to this. And this is a consequence of this.
Um, Post-colonial era um, was based in terms of ethnicity and region. I'm talking about Nigeria specifically, whereby each region and ethnic group, based in terms of their, power structure, brought up leaders within the center that constituted the body. The problem is that the essence of being Nigeria, of being Nigerian, was lost. Because we have to make the decision. Emil Durkheim, a sociologist, deals with this issue in terms of, is the whole more important than some of its parts, or some of its parts more important than the whole? Because whenever you're dealing with an issue, you have to make that decision. If the whole is more important than some of its parts, then some of its parts must defer to the whole, or the other way around. In other words, if we first of all need to think as Nigerians, then must be degraded. The problem in Nigeria is, politically speaking, today. So, we have a political system in place. We have politicians in place. These are the people that are supposed to take care of the country and the people. We have a country that is falling apart, is breaking up. We have different elements. Security is a very big issue in Nigeria. How many politicians are worried about it? How many Nigerians are worried about it? Nigerians are saying is in the north. Oh, they created that problem. We have a president who is saying, well, I know that there are Boko Haram in my administration. We have situations where people are telling you that we don't want the north because they've dominated us for too long. Are they not Nigerians? How can you say the north has dominated us for too long? That in 50-something years of Nigeria, that one group of Nigerians from a certain part of the country dominated us. Well, we've had a political system with a constitution for the last 16 years dominated by the Southerners. So is it a question of you get in, you secure yourself and build on it? Where is the Nigerian and where is Nigeria in there? Am I just supposed to take my advantage politically and use it to the detriment of other Nigerians? And yet, guess what? I go to those same people that I've trashed, the people that I say cannot become a part of Nigeria, and I tell them to vote for me. I mean, so, back again to our educational system, we do not build that conscience, that consciousness of being Nigerian, so that if I'm sitting in the room with you without the cameras on, that we will be talking about the best for Nigeria, not just the best for our ethnic group or the region that we come from. So who is a Nigerian? I mean, what is Nigeria? And who does the president represent? So is this, divisions that are creating a whole lot of problem within the system? We must address the base. Is the whole more important than some of its parts, or some of its parts more important than the whole? If you agree that the whole, which is Nigeria, is more important than ethnicity or region, we must lock it in. We must bring it home. And everyone must succumb to it. Or if you don't want that, and you say the parts are more than the whole, okay. Then we have a system whereby, we just get on the table and bring our powers that be, and whoever wins rules. This is what I'm saying, that our educated folks need to be dealing with these issues and really wrestling with them, because that's part of what the educational system is supposed to be. I mean, right. Until we do that, can I move on?
Right. If you look at
your question.
Right. Yes. If you look at Africa right now, would you say that any of this is possible?
It is possible if you redo your educational system in terms of curriculum. You see, that's the base. I mean, if you look at United States, United States is very critical in terms of its educational system and in terms of what you study when you are in school. Remember, as an undergrad in the United States, your first 2 years in the university is general studies, what we call general education. We call it general education. It has nothing to do with your special area. 2 years. Your last 2 years is is for your or whatever you want to do. Your first 2 years is like a platter. You visit each one of these departments. You must take credit. You must take courses from each one of those, whatever, 5, 7 areas. It is your third year in the university that you actually decide on a major. I mean, you can come in deciding what you want to study in the university from the get-go, but you're not going to be doing it from the get-go because you must go through the liberal arts, right? You have the social sciences, you have the humanities, you have arts, right? You have multicultural studies, you have all these areas. You must go through those areas before you start your main area of discipline. In the Nigerian educational system, we must force our kids to go through these experiences. A curriculum that is standard for all universities, that they must go through. They must take exams in them. They must understand them. And then also build other cultural bases by which we really understand, because that's where we argue them. That's where we discuss them, right? We don't discuss these issues like the president recently did in terms of bringing a collective together and telling them to discuss national, whatever they call them. I can't remember exactly what it is. Guess what he did? Each one of those candidates got 12 million naira. They sat them together for 3 months, deal with issues.
Yeah, the national conference, I believe they call it.
National conference. What came out of it? What came out of it? Is that where you discuss it? People that are already hardened in their own areas, and you pay them 12 million each? No, you go back to us. When we were growing up, we had civics, right? We had conduct as part of your exit, right? If your conduct was not good, but you pass your exam, you have problem. You can't transition. Right?
Yes, go ahead. I like to go to economics. Just ask you one question and see how you bring it together with what you're talking about. I recently saw a video where someone in East Africa, who is part of the government in her country, was talking about a recent visit by the Nigerian president to her country, and said that her country really was booming during that visit because he brought a delegation of about 600, and many Nigerians that came in their private jets and spent a lot of money there. And we know that in the UK there has been a lot of discussion about how much money Nigerians are spending there and in Dubai, and those countries actually love it because Nigerians have a lot of money to spend. And today we have a report that 13 Nigerian banks they actually feature in the top 1,000 banks in the world. 13 Nigerian banks are now rated among the top 1,000 in the world. Does that matter in terms of what you're discussing, in terms of the lives of the people and the society?
It matters a lot. First of all, let's look at it this way. Nigeria is the number one economic power in the continent, right? But look at it this way. What does that mean for the average Nigerian? Right? The problem really comes out of economics, right? Because in economics, the bottom line is all that matters, right? Okay, say for instance, you go to this is the season for income tax and filing, right? A couple goes to file income tax, right? Husband and wife goes to file income tax, and the husband is the one working, so he presents his papers, and the wife is sitting next to him, and the person who is attending to them asks the wife, "Do you work?" And the wife says, "No, I don't. My husband works. I just came with him," right? Now, So let's say the husband makes $50,000 a year, right? That's the family's income, right? And in terms of their own consciousness, right, is that the husband is the one working. The wife who stays at home, take care of the children, does all the home stuff, is not factored in economically as working. So she feels she doesn't work. Well, sociologists have computed and they've come up with the fact that a woman who stays at home contributes in the United States almost at least $50,000 to the family every year when you take into consideration what she does, if you really want to pay for that. But we really never recognize that kind of stuff, right? So is money talks, right? Hard cash talks. Okay, so go back to Nigeria. The thing in Nigeria these days is money. You have the money, you call the shots. If we are, look at the rebasing of Nigeria in terms of its economics, that makes it the number one economic power in the continent, right? South Africa number 2. Compare both countries. Average Nigerian in 1 year, $1,760 in 1 year, right? If you put it all together, $1,000, $1,700 and something dollars. South Africa, 7,000 plus, right? So if you are looking at, in other words, if we look at the individual lives of these people in these countries, that's where you see the difference in terms of inequality. So in Nigeria, you now have this 0.000 whatever 1% that really might be 90% of the country's wealth, right? I'm being conservative to say 90%. It's really more than 90%. And then you have the rest of them. So when these Nigerians go outside, they say we are Nigerians and we are developing and we are doing well. It's not really Nigeria. All you have to do is go to Nigeria and see the conditions. These same people go back to Nigeria, no electricity. Their generators are running. This is what I'm talking about. In other words, in our curriculum, in our system, we need to learn what should be my expectation as a Nigerian. What should I expect from my leaders? We all need to understand that if the basic infrastructure is my right, then we will be less tolerant of these conditions that prevail. But I'm telling you that Nigerians do not understand that they have rights. So that during election, whatever you give to them, they take. But they do not understand that they have rights. They do not even understand what accrues to the country and the economy that belongs to them. They don't understand this. We do not teach them. There's nowhere to learn it, which is different from, developed countries where they are taught what the expectations should be. And if you don't get it, you demand for it. We don't have that. So you're talking about religion and politics. Look at the poor Nigerians who donate money to these televangelists or TV evangelists. And these people have built universities all over Nigeria. Universities everywhere, all kinds of institutions. Yet they don't offer scholarship. Those poor people's money is the one you collect every Sunday, is how you build those universities. Yet you do not offer them scholarship. They can't go to your university. Those who are donating money for you can't go to the university you set up. Guess who goes to the university you set up? The thieves of the society are the ones that comes to those religious-based institutions because they're the ones who can afford them and enjoy it. Contributions are immense.
Right. You actually just took this conversation to the question that I was going to ask you, which was the responsibility of the citizen. to make sure that the leaders don't continue to rip them off. But you also brought up a question of gender relations, and I would like you to come back at some point to discuss the gender relations. That is important because in this interview with your uncle that I was reading, he was talking about the fact that his father, this was many, many years ago, that his father never let his mother even go to the farm, and she never split wood, never did any hard labor, because your grandfather believed that just by your mother taking care of the children and taking care of the domestic issues, domestic matters at home, she was doing, she was working enough. So there was no reason for him to put more on her. In a few weeks, I'm going to have some women as my guests who are from Africa, and they will be talking about how they see gender relations from the women's point of view. And I would like you to come back to discuss gender relations, but I also want you to expand a little on that responsibility of the African citizen, and what is it that they ought to be doing that they are really not doing to hold their leaders to account. Have, for example, have Africans begun to think too little? Because it just doesn't seem that Africans are asking a lot. Let me point you to, I don't know if you've read it, Ngozi Chimamanda Adichie, her op-ed in yesterday's New York Times. This is the prolific author who lives here and lives in Nigeria. She ended the article by saying that the following. She wrote, and I will read: as we prepare, that is Nigeria, prepare for elections amid severe security concerns, this remains an essential and poignant need. Nigeria needs a government that will create the environment for steady and stable electricity and the simple luxury of a monthly bill. She's not asking for a lot, and Nigerians are not asking for a lot from a government or governments that don't seem to be able to deliver. What more can the African citizen do?
Look, if the African citizen understands rights, it will change our political system. If you have been working on providing electricity for the last 54 years or 50 something years, and you've not been able to do it, and yet you keep telling your people that we're making progress, we're making progress, we're making progress, and you spent in excess of 10, 15, 20 billion dollars. They don't know that. You just keep telling them we're making progress. Nothing ever happens. Citizens don't really understand that is my right, because they can always go get firewood and then figure out how to make that, how to survive. There are certain basic things that the citizen need to be educated to understand and ask for. Education, simple issue of electricity, communication, good roads. Those are basic stuff. I don't want you building stadium for me. Nigerian governors are spending money, and Nigerian government are spending money building huge stadiums. Go to the gender issue. Who is going to use those stadiums? Men, right? Is it women and children that will be running to the stadium to go watch game? What are our priorities? What are priorities? So my thing, simple issues. Just give us basic water, power, at least those two. I need to be able to wake up in the morning. Just electricity alone, right? If you can guarantee that to Africans, you will not believe they'll be so independent because they'll be doing their business. You can go buy a little machine to grind things, pepper, onion, little machine, $50 machine, give it to somebody in the village, and there's power, he's in business. Because all of the houses on that, the street and the area will come grind there. I mean, you're not doing anything. You just sit down with your machine, and people come with their pepper and their onions and whatever. You grind it for them, take 10 naira from them. You're just sitting there. There's just because there's power. He's in business. He can feed his family from that. Little things. We're not talking about big things. I'm not talking about go to the moon. I'm just saying provide basic necessities. And these citizens need to demand for those necessities. They need to be able to tell their government, if you can't give me this in 4 years, we will throw you out. Because you were the one, you came up and said, I will give you these things. But it's 4 years. You are coming back to say we can't get it done in 4 years. Nothing can be done in 4 years. You need 8 years. What are you talking about? All right, then make it 8 years then. You serve 8 years and you're gone. I mean, this, simple issues is what I'm talking about. Simple things for the citizens to demand. You know what happens? Citizens don't do that because the politician comes to the citizen and say, those people don't like us, right? What we call external aggression breeds internal cohesion. Always create perpetual fear that numbs the public, and then you control them. This is what we have been experiencing. And in today's Nigeria, look at the politics that's going on. People from the Niger Delta feels that their man must come back no matter what. Tell me what they have individually been able to receive on the average from the government for the last 6 years. Look at Southerners talking about the North has dominated us for all this long. Where the South has had power for 16 years plus, just about, right? PDP, one political party, has been in power for 16 years. Tell me what the Southerners have received. And do you know that these Southerners are the ones who are mostly scattered all over the world? How many of them have come home in the last 16 years? What has been created for them to come home for? 2 in the last 16 years. So the citizens don't advocate for themselves. They go there, fight and die for these individuals who are within the system that are just liquidating them. Why will a senator from Nigeria be receiving $1 million a year in terms of salary? I don't want to discuss with you what their retirement is, right? All of that coming from the coffers of the federal government. So by the time you take these people's salary, retirement, and you take it and look at what is left, is amazing. So, I mean, that's just in terms of the expectations from the citizens. What the citizens should expect. What the citizens should demand for. This is what Adichie is saying. Here is someone who is privileged, right? Can be in any part of the world she wants to be, right? Chooses to live in Nigeria. Now, she still is very privileged to be able to get all this, generator that she calls Buddha, and you have all of this, yet you still understand that you are lacking. So if she can feel that, what do you expect from the guy down the street?
Right. You see, Professor, that brings me to one question. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie was born into privilege and raised in privilege. And you and I were, which raises the question that many people ask, and many people that will see this and people that know us ask. I have been asked, and I'm sure you have too. Why do we care, and why should we care about the plight of others? Why are you passionate about it?
Well, my sociology, my education, the education I received was not the education for me to feed with. The education I received was for my own development, for my own welfare, for my own sanity, for me to be able to understand who I am, and for me to be able to use that education to deal with the landmines that I'll be encountering, for me to understand me, my environment, and why things are the way they are. Just education as a tool of empowerment first, before I go out there to go figure out what I'm going to do with it, right? For us Africans, education is to feed with.
Yeah.
Education is not for development. You know, I need to be able to critique myself and do better for me with my education. I need to understand that. I need to be able to understand how I relate to other people as I learn. You know, like we say, you teach to learn, right? So as I that's fundamental. That is what drives me. That I understand these things, I can see them, and I'm still learning. And we all need to look at education for that purpose. We need to use the education to challenge ourselves, right? Because we have a lot of, chains around us that brings us down, that holds us down. And that brings, I, I will deal with that when you come to the issue of gender. Because if you're only going to use your education as a means to feed yourself, you have a very serious problem. Because there's really no future. And there are myriads of problems that you'll be experiencing that you do not understand, that money cannot solve.
If you don't mind, I like to ask a personal question as a way, because we are coming to the end of this, and good thing I have broken this into segments, because you have really had a lot to say, as I expected. I believe it was exactly 4 years ago this weekend that your father died. No, it's been, yeah, 4 years, right? Right. And I am wondering what you think he would say if he was here and looking at the country that he worked hard for.
That's disappointed. He already was disappointed before he passed on. He was already disappointed when he was a judge. Do you know there was a few cases that came to his court, when we were transitioning from the military to the civilian? There were cases that came to his court that he postponed judgment on. He wanted to judge them when we had, transition from the military to the civilian, because some of these cases involved the military. And he postponed them because he knew rendering judgment as of that time will not be that effective. It won't matter much, right? And look, his briefs that he challenged the military, the government of the day, challenged his chief judge also. He was an independent thinker, right? And he always made sure he explained it to us where he stood in certain things, right? Even to those who were in our homes. I remember him once telling my mom, the one of the house help did something, and my mom was really angry, and talking to the house help. Do you know that my dad, after my mom finished, and I was sitting there, I happened to be there, and my dad looked at my mom and said, maybe it would have been best if you had called him aside and talked to him, not in the presence of his wife and his children. My mom never did that again. I mean, in the burst of anger, my mom did. But yet, my dad called my mom to order in terms of that. It's just in terms of how we look at each other. in spite of our social positions. I look out for you, you look out for me, but based on in terms of my education, I need to use it. It's not just so much what the custom says. I need to be able to use it. Let me bring in the gender issue in terms of this. In my family, my dad always made it clear that children answers their father's name traditionally, right? By tradition, you answer your father's name because that's what gives legitimacy to the child. But he always indicated that a lot of Nigerian fathers are irresponsible. But because of tradition, they claim that power. So that a father who never took care of you when you are ready to get married is the one that your mother who took care of you will go beg to show up to give the daughter away. And my dad couldn't never understand this man who never participated in the life of the child. The person who raised this child will go fall on their knees to beg this man to come give this child away. What role did the father play in the child's life? So because of tradition, we have to just deal with the situation as it is. This is where your education and these issues of tradition and the way in other words, let your education be a strong part of your own self-development. And this is what my dad said. Now, so if you are a father and the child answers your name, the responsibility of the child is to you. The father is the one that must carry the burden of the family because the family becomes you. It's not the wife, but in Africa, the wife is the one carrying all of the load on her head, and the man can decide to trash the wife and the children and just dispose of them and start a new family from scratch. And what happens to those children and the wife? Gone. Now that woman now has to go figure how to go to the market, figure out how she's going to raise the kids, answering that man's name, and then those children then become something later. Then the man takes the credit, right? Where do we discuss these issues in our educational system? As a college kid, 20 years old, 19 years old, 18 years old, where do you sit down to discuss these things before you become a father? Before you marry? What general education course do I have? A sociology of the family course where I tease these issues out. It's not that I have to change anything, but I get to discuss this so that I get to think about them.
Right. I have a personal story about your dad. I recall many years ago. This was probably in the early 80s. Maybe around 1984 or so. No. Probably around 1983 or 82. I had read in the newspapers about a case that he presided over. And you'll be surprised to hear this. He had presided over this case, and it was the case of a man who I believe killed his wife. He murdered his wife and probably one of his children. The case came before your dad. I don't quite remember the details, but this guy was found guilty. And the journalist wrote, and you could actually see the emotions coming through the article. And the journalist wrote that your dad sentenced him to die. This was a time when men really didn't get killed, didn't get to go to the gas chambers for killing a woman or for killing their spouses. But what I thought was fascinating, what I will never forget, is the fact that the newspaper journalist wrote that your father, in declaring the sentence, seemed to agonize over it, even though that was the law. He was following the law. He seemed to agonize over it, and then said the words that I have never forgotten since then. Your father said the following words: "I sentence you to die, but I pray the following: that may God have mercy on your soul." And he actually presented it as if it was a very difficult thing for your father to do, and your father very much wanted a way to redeem this guy. you know, and I said, for me, that was the example. It seemed like a great example of tempering justice with mercy. I don't know if you ever had this conversation with him about how he viewed the law and how that in some way related to his person. But there is another angle to that story because on that same day, and as you know, our parents, that generation, they all knew one another very well, basically. And I recall that later that day, after I read this story in the newspaper, my father called me over and said, I am going to see Justice Ohiwerei and I need you to drive me. And I wondered why, because my father's driver was there. He was home in his own quarters, but my father wanted me to drive him. And I said, but then again, you know that back home, if your father wanted you to drive him, you were very happy to do it, And so I drove him there, and of course, I sat in the car, and he went inside, and both men had a very long time together, and they spent quite some time together talking. And when my dad was coming out, your dad walked him to the car and they spent some time talking again before we left. I never asked my father what the visit was about or what they discussed. To this day, I don't know, and of course, I will never know because both men are gone. But I think about that, and I think about the fact that these were two men who chose to do different things with their lives, but each followed the other and each cared about society and cared about the people that lived in it. I'm not sure how much of that we have left. And I never asked my dad that question. I never knew where he stood on those issues, but I just thought that he was perhaps responding to a call from his friend, and they went and spent this time together. I don't even know if it was about a story in the newspapers. And I'm just wondering if we look at Africa today, how much of that, with everybody just trying to run after money, there doesn't seem to be that kind of personal touch anymore. Because you visit Nigeria as well as I do visit Africa. And we go there and we find relatives who haven't seen one another in 8 years and they live in the same city. So I really don't know how all of that comes together, but I wanted you, as at least as part of your final comments, to explain to me, what this means.
Three things I want to bring up, and I hope I don't forget. One is for the African, especially for those with children who are going to university, please allow them to study whatever they want to study. Do not make money the reason for why they should not study whatever they want to study. Because we just want all of our kids to be lawyers and doctors. That is not how you build a community. While saying that, the community must recognize the liberal arts so that you don't want to graduate a liberal arts and you're making 2 cents a year. We need to understand that we have not started building yet. And we need all the different areas of thought and thinking to be playing seriously in terms of that development. We cannot continue to borrow from other society we consider to be developed. We fail to understand that they develop the system out of their own cultural base, and that we importing is not going to help us develop in terms of that level of fast tracking. Number two, in terms of gender, males and females, we pretend like we are balanced, right? I remember when I was coming to the US and I went to my dad, I said, we were discussing me coming to the United States. My dad said, why do you think that it's time for you to go to the US? Your sister, who is older than I, said, did you ask your sister if she wants to go to the US? I said, no, I'm just speaking for myself. My dad said, Liz, look, if your sister will have to determine whether she wants to go now or she wants to stay in Nigeria and then you go. I never thought of that. So and I said, okay, maybe he should ask my sister. No, my dad said, no, 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 no. You ask your sister. In other words, you take permission from your sister because she's older. And then you come tell me what she said. I'm not going to go to your sister so that it's like I'm imposing on her. You ask your sister if she wants to go to go overseas for her education. If she's going, you will have to wait. If she's not ready to go, then you go. So I had to be nice and with breaking voice go to my sister to say, look, I need to go. Gender issues need to be critically considered. The role of women in our societies need to be seriously considered, right? Women are having a tough time in our societies. A lot of our educated women are prostituting just to make it through the university. We have lecturers that are taking 2,000-3,000 naira from students just for them to pass their courses. The embarrassment that exists within Nigerian high-level system is not something, it's just a whole different story, right? So even at that, so it becomes very essential that these are the things that we have to kind of put in perspective. And again, like my dad said, until we are willing to let the education that we have help us, we are not going to make that kind of progress that we need. The last point has to do with the role of women and children as a block. Every government in Africa needs to consider women and children as a group and in terms of social welfare for women and children, whether it has to do with abuse on all kinds of levels or even in terms of therapy and psychotherapy. There's just a lot that we do not deal with when it comes to women and their issues. There's a lot that we do not deal with. Just last point. I was talking to a Nigerian girl that was talking about birth control, and she was telling me that salt and water is used for birth control. You take a little salt and you drink water with it. This is an educated woman. The affairs of women we are not dealing with. We need a ministry for women and children. A whole ministry, a whole department. I'm not talking religion, just to deal with those issues so that we start to go through the educational process of helping them with their problems, right? We can't be doing self-therapy all the time. So we need to look at our basic problems, just our basic problems for empowerment. Men, like we say, if you train a woman, you're training her children. If you train a man, you're training the man for a second, third wife. I mean, you cross your fingers that he takes care of his kids, but there's no law that mandates him to take care of his children.
As I said, I really want you to come back to discuss these gender issues. But on a final note, my guests next week will be some professional women from that I will be hooking up electronically from the United Kingdom and the United States and Canada, who were born and raised by African parents in those countries where they live. And they're very successful professional women with African parents. So I am just wondering if you can suggest to me what questions I should ask them. If you can just give me two questions that you think I should ask.
One, their relationship with their father, if they are sincere enough to discuss it, or even if it's not personal, what they as women see, generally speaking, in terms of relationship between fathers and daughters, and relationship between mothers and fathers, because you need to contrast those two. Number two, welfare for women in terms of, basic upbringing, grooming, caring, understanding security issues for the women, right? These are essential conditions. And also in terms of dating, relationship between dating African men or Nigerian men as compared to others, right? Social relationships that exist. And the last maybe has to do in terms of women are supporting each other, right? In other words, where do they get their strength from? From friends, their mothers, in terms of women, right? And what kind of interactions takes place as far as those issues are concerned? Because too many grow up with a lot of ignorance out there, and also cultural impositions. Let them just list for you maybe three issues that they feel needs to be addressed in terms of cultural impediment.
So I really, really want to thank you, and I expect to see you back here very shortly because there is just a lot that we still have to discuss. And we know that the Nigerian elections will come up in less than 2 weeks. And as Nigeria goes through its troubles in the rest of Africa, the individuals, like you have just discussed today, are also going through tremendous challenges. So we'll continue to have conversations about this. And I look forward to seeing you back here soon. And I will continue to follow your work because I am very proud, when I see what you do and when I see what various African scholars do in this country and around the world. I am very happy. And I look forward to seeing you soon, sir. Thank you very much for being my guest.
It's a pleasure speaking, and thank you very much for the invitation.
I look forward. Have a great weekend, whatever is left of it.
Thank you.
Bye bye.